Mindful Happy Kids, created and narrated by Dr. Elisabeth Paige, consists of interviews with children's authors and poets and illustrators, musicians of all types, and yoga and mindfulness practitioners. Dr. Paige also reads from her own children's books on compassion, gratitude, mindfulness, and yoga. Pippi the puppy and Dr. Paige practice meditations or pet-centered meditations, which are recorded as part of the videos. Hi, Dan Gemeinhart. Thank you so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this interview for quite a while now. So would you like to take a couple of moments to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. And thanks so much for having me. My pleasure. It's very cold here where I live. It's 2 degrees right now. And so
Oh my
being
goodness.
inside doing this is a great option for me. So my name is Dan Gemeinhart, and I live up in the mountains in Washington State, where we're having a cold snap. And I live here with my wife, who's an English teacher, and 3 daughters who are in 12th grade, 8th grade, and 5th grade. And I was a teacher for years, an elementary school librarian for 13 years and loved it. But I always had this dream of someday being an author and someday writing my own books because I was a book lover from as long as I can remember. From the time I was a little kid, I loved books, loved reading, and kind of always knew I wanted to try to write my own someday. And then one day I kind of jumped into it and I wrote for years in the evenings and on the weekends while still being a teacher, and took me a lot of tries and a lot of rejections and several books that never got published. But then once upon a time, I finally got that book deal, and my first book, The Honest Truth, came out in 2015 with Scholastic, and I've had 5 more books come out since. So I've had six novels for young readers get published, and my 7th one comes out in well, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but a couple months, on March 3rd, maybe, 2024. So just a couple months away.
I can't wait. Just so
Nice.
you know, I've been like sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for this book.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And so that's always fun and exciting when a new book is going out there into the world. And now, of course, I'm working on the next one. Publishing is a really slow business. Everything takes years. And so you don't wait for one book to come out to start the next one. You got to kind of always be working on the next thing. So I'm about a third of the way through what will hopefully be my next book. And that's kind of me and my life in a nutshell.
Okay, I'm going to go completely out of order because I always do.
Mhm.
What's your next book?
So my 5th book was called The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise, about this girl who lives this really unusual life, and she lives on an old school bus with her dad. And this new one coming out is called Coyote Lost and Found, and it is kind of the next chapter in Coyote's story. It's not really a sequel, and the publisher's being really careful not to call it a sequel for various reasons. That makes sense, actually, because a sequel is kind of like the second half of one story. But this really is the first book with its own entire story, with the build, the rising action, the climax, the resolution. And this book is the same characters, but it really is its own story. And I worked hard to try to make it so that you wouldn't have to read the first one to read the second one, and you wouldn't have to read the second one to read the first one. But if you have read the first one, you'll probably get more out of it because you'll know the character and you'll know a little bit more about her life. But it's called Coyote Lost and Found. And it's another journey story. I love journeys. Almost all of my books are the character going on a journey for some reason. I think I don't know why. It's just kind of the stories I like to read, the stories I like to write. And so this is our same character, Coyote, and her dad, Rodeo, and her cat, Ivan. Ivan's back. If you read the first one, and Salvador, her friend Salvador, is back for this one. But there's a whole cast of new characters as well, and her dad have to hit the road again to set off on another hopefully fun, emotional, heartfelt adventure journey. And so that comes out in a couple months, and I'm super excited.
What about after that? You said you were working on another book.
Yeah, I'm working on another, and it's contemporary realistic middle grade fiction, so kind of where I'm at. It is another journey story, less journey-ish, more quest-ish. I don't know if there's a difference in the real world. In my mind, it's a little different. And so it's not a kid trying to go somewhere. It's a kid trying to get something to happen, kind of, but he has to travel for it to happen. So it's another cast of characters, friendship. There's some unlikely friendships that get thrown together. And so it's there's a story as a writer, there's the kinds of stories that you like to tell that resonate with you. And so hopefully I don't ever get too repetitive and people say, oh, it's just like his other ones. But I also do try to write in a way that if a reader reads one of my books and likes it, they'll hopefully also like my other ones. I don't have some crazy dark science fiction and then some, whimsical little fairy tale. Mine are all kind of a piece, and I kind of like it that way. And this next one, if I get it done, if anyone publishes it, will hopefully fit right there on the shelf with my other books.
Yeah, I've noticed that about your books. They're not too similar because you can read them all and they're very different stories. But I like adventure stories and I like journeys and I love your style of writing.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, and really what I really love, um, like stories. I love stories that have action and adventure and excitement. But I also love stories that have a lot of emotion and some big feelings and some deep feelings. Like pure adventure is fun. Like James Bond is very fun, but there's very little emotion in there. And pure emotion is great. You read those, really moving stories of a kid dealing with divorce or something, and it's really about the internal stuff, and that is great too. I also love those books. But when I put my own books together, I try to blend it, have some big action adventure, cliffhangers, plot twists, but also have some real deep, true emotion, just because that's kind of what I like to write, and it's really what I love to read.
It's also, I've noticed that you have deep emotions for your male characters as well as for your female characters, which is somewhat unusual.
Oh, for sure. And I think that is, yeah, I mean, books and people can often get pigeonholed. And this is a quote unquote boy book, and this is a quote unquote girl book, which I hate. And emotions and identities and things like that also get pigeonholed in that. And I think that boys or males can have just as rich an emotional life as females. And that's, you're right, it's not often represented as much. And I think it should be. So it's it's something. It's not something that I do on purpose. Like, oh, I'm going to create this story about an emotional boy. But most of my main characters, tend to be boys. Just I guess because I'm a male myself. And I do look to put that hopefully authentic emotion in there.
Great. So, do you want to take me through your writing journey?
Yeah, you mean like the publishing journey, like to
Well,
getting.
just where it all started and where you went from there and how you moved from one part of your writing journey to the other and your publishing journey.
Right. So my writing journey really started as a kid. And as a kid, my family moved a lot. We moved like every year, sometimes more than once a year. And so that can be hard because I was always showing up to a new state, a new town, a new house, a new school. So there was a lot of kind of instability and uncertainty in my life. And the thing that I had, well, I mean, my family was great. I had a great family, but I also like books and libraries became my favorite things and my favorite places because I was always showing up to a new school and everything was always different. But every school I went to had a library, and the libraries were always full of books. And those books were pretty much the same from one school to the next. And so if I started reading Charlotte's Web in one school and we moved, I could probably find Charlotte's Web in the next school as well and finish reading it there. And so books were my safe harbor, and libraries were my happy places. And so from early on, that was just a big part of me and my life and my dreams. And then, but I always kind of talked about it. I didn't really jump into my writing. I mean, all through middle school, high school, college, I would talk about being a writer, and I'd write, a couple pages here, a couple pages there, write a poem. But it wasn't until I was in my 20s, out of college, working as a teacher, that I kind of realized, man, like I've been dreaming about writing a book someday for my whole life. And it's never too late. You can write your first book when you're 80, but why wait? And that's kind of what I realized. Like someday is right now. And so then I jumped into it when I was probably 24ish, 25ish, and started really trying to learn to write books. And then took me a long time. The first book I wrote was like an adult book that never got published. And it was really hard to write, but I learned a ton, even though it was garbage. And even when I finished it, I knew it was garbage. That's okay, because I learned a million things when I wrote that. And I couldn't wait to jump into my second book because I knew it would be like 1,000% better. And it was, but it was still terrible. And so then I kept working on it and kept working on it, kept writing books that never got published. And it wasn't until my sixth book that I actually got published. So I have 5 books that never got published, but each one I was learning a ton, and each one was better than the one before. And also I figured out I wanted to write for kids. So my first book was an adult book, and then with my second book on, I jumped into writing for younger readers because I was working as an elementary school librarian and reading all these great middle grade books. And I said, holy cow, these are amazing. And these have come a million miles since I was a middle grade reader myself. And this is what I want to write. These stories are so fun, but they're also like really deep and they deal with heavy stuff. And so I fell in love with middle grade literature and started trying to write it myself. And then, a short decade later, after trying to become a writer and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of rejections, I finally wrote that sixth book, and then got an agent and got a deal. And now this is what I do full time. Now I'm an author. And so from the humble beginnings as a young child who loved books, through years of trying and failing, I feel super lucky and grateful that I kind of didn't give up and I pushed through and I made it. And here I am today talking to you as an author. Dream come true.
You want to start with your first book, The Honest Truth,
Sure.
and talk about it?
So yeah,
So
yeah, go
that
for it.
one deals with cancer.
It has cancer in it, yeah. And so the honest truth's about a kid who runs away, he's 12, who runs away from home with his dog to try to climb Mount Rainier. So it's a Washington State story, that's where I live. And yes, the reason the kid runs away is because the kid, Mark is his name, has been battling cancer, and he thought that the cancer was gone, but he finds out the cancer's come back. And before he goes back into the hospital for more treatments, he wants to fulfill this dream he's had of climbing Mount Rainier. And so he runs away with his dog to try to do that. Now, I tried to make it not a grim, sad book. I tried to make it not a cancer book, for various reasons. And so I don't think of it as a sad book. I don't think of it I don't think of it at all as a book about dying, but as a book about living. It's an adventure story. It's a friendship story. It's a survival story. And so like the word cancer is in there, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. Like that's all that kind of happened in the backstory. And the story that's on the pages is really about this kid and what he's going through and what he's trying to do and what he learns along the way.
It's also about the relationship between a kid and his grandfather.
Yep, that's a little in the backstory. One of his motivations for wanting to climb Mount Rainier, why would you pick that? Is because that's something him and his grandpa had talked about doing before his grandpa died. So that's part of Mark's backstory as well.
Yeah, it was a big adventure story, and Bew, the dog, was so important.
Yes,
And the
yes.
relationship between Bew and and what's the main character's name?
Mark.
Mark, that's right.
Yeah.
Between Bew and Mark was so amazing and intense and loving and wonderful.
Yeah,
And yeah, I wanted you to talk about that a little bit.
sure. And so I pronounce the dog's name Bo.
Oh,
And so
Bo, okay.
Bo. And so yeah, and that Bo's in there for a couple of reasons. One, because I love dogs, and I'm a big animal lover. And also kids love dogs. And like, in middle grade fiction, dog is almost his own genre. There's so many, I mean, everyone knows Where the Red Fern Grows and Old Yeller, going back to the classics all the way up to the modern day, love that dog. And I mean, there's so many great middle grade books that feature dogs. I think just because kids love dogs and dogs are amazing and dogs are great kind of mirrors for us and they can help us see our own humanity and our own courage or whatever, our own love. And so I love dogs. I love dog stories. So that's one reason why Bo's in there. But also, again, because I didn't want the story to be too dark. I mean, it's a kid with cancer. It was going to have some real darkness and sadness in it, no matter what I did. But I was always looking for ways to try to lift it up. And if you think about this story, if you've read the story, if you take Bo out of it, boy, it's a dark story. I have this kid all by himself alone. It's a whole different story, and I don't think in a good way. It would just be really grim. I don't think it'd be fun to read. And so I really wanted I wanted Mark to be alone on the human level because he's got to think about a lot and process a lot. So I didn't want him have like a friend with him, but I didn't want him to be alone as he faces all these challenges and hardships. And so having Bo by his side makes it 1,000% less sad, that he's got this amazing dog who's incredibly loyal, who's never going to leave his side. Every step of the journey, he's got this incredible companion, and that really lifts the story up. It also brings things into focus for Mark, especially towards the end. There's a couple of moments when Bo's really in jeopardy, and that gives Mark a new perspective on what he's doing, and is this the right thing to be doing? And my choices don't just impact me, they affect others as well. And having Bo kind of be at stake also really helps with that.
He also has this really good friend, Jesse.
Hmm.
And Jesse, I love the way that you put the chapters, a chapter from his perspective, then a chapter from Jesse's perspective, and the chapters from Jesse's perspective were half chapters. And I
Right.
thought that was a great way of doing it so that you were able to differentiate the two. But he was also doing that relationship was real important in that book.
Right. And that was something I worked hard on as well. And those half chapters, I couldn't figure out how to tell the story because I tried writing it in third person and I didn't like it. I really wanted us to be in Mark's head, seeing Mark's thoughts, feeling Mark's feelings. But I also wanted to show that home piece, what's going on with his family, his parents, what's going on with his friend. And there was no way to show that in first person because he doesn't know what's happening back home. So I was like, oh man, this is like an impossible story to tell. And then I got the idea for those half chapters. It's just a random, I mean, it's kind of a cheat. And I thought, well, this isn't going to work because it doesn't make sense. How are we seeing this? What's going on? How can I explain that we're seeing what's happening back home? But I thought I'll try it. And I thought it kind of worked. So we've got
It
the
did
main
work.
chapters in Mark's voice. And then the half chapters are, I did everything I could to make them different so that the reader wasn't confused. They're called half chapters. It's not chapter 2, it's chapter 1.5. Also, instead of being in first person, they're in third person. And I put them in italics. So it literally looks different. So we're getting these random, unexplained, but helpful and I think important snapshots as to what's happening back home. And so I wanted to bring that Jesse friendship out again to make Mark less alone, less lonely, but also again to show that your choices you make as a human being don't just impact you. And that gives him some perspective.
Yes. The okay, let's talk about your number one New York Times bestseller, The Midnight Children.
All right.
So, slaughterhouses. Whoa. That's all I have to say.
Yeah,
It was so descriptive
and
and
that's funny
so graphic.
because
Just
I never, yeah, I never saw it that way. And I have gotten, some people have liked it and I've gotten some less positive feedback, both in like online reviews and even in emails. And to me, because yeah, there's some details that I thought were, I mean, not like quote unquote fun. So, but there's like blood and there's some scenes that happen in this slaughterhouse because it's this grim, horrible town, this like overdrawn, like Roald Dahl kind of town called Slaughterville. Everyone works at the slaughterhouse. I was just trying to make it like comically dark, not actually disturbingly dark, just to show how low this kid is. So when the story happens and he changes, he sees a whole new way of being. There's a real contrast there. And so yeah, there's some scenes that happen in the slaughterhouse. And to me, it was like fun gross out, like, oh, let's kind of lean into this a little bit. I still think it is. I stand by it. I think it's fun. And I've never heard complaints from kids, but for the record. I've heard some complaints from adults, never from kids. Kids seem to think it's fun, gross out humor, or not exactly humor, but I guess details. And I've also been accused of having some agenda against meat or something. Not the case. In fact, there's only one vegetarian in the story, and it's the villain. The villain is a vegetarian. No one else is. And so if I have an agenda, I guess it would be the other way around. But I mean, no one thinks that slaughterhouses are super fun, cool, cozy, great places, right? And so to say, oh, he's got these gross slaughterhouse scenes, he must be anti-meat. That's like saying if I had a haunted house in a story that I'm anti-house or something. Haunted houses are creepy, and slaughterhouses kind of unpleasant. We all know what happens there. And so, yeah, I didn't have an agenda. I didn't think it was going to be a problem. That's been a little eye-opening for me. And for most people, it's not. I mean, the book is well reviewed. It's done well. But yeah, I didn't have any agenda. I just thought, oh, let's make this as creepy and as dark as we can. What if there's these scenes in the slaughterhouse? And what do you see in a slaughterhouse? You might see some animal parts. You might, in fact, you will certainly see some animal parts. You'll certainly see some blood. I didn't think it was over the top or gratuitous. I still don't think it was over the top or gratuitous. Hopefully it's a fun, surprising flavor to add to the story is what I was shooting for.
I think it contrasted the relationship that he had with the cow,
Right,
the
right.
cow that he helped escape.
Yeah.
Because he was like, oh, wow, I can take this one cow and help this one friend escape. And the friend comes back to help him. And it's just like this, it's a definite important contrast.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
So you have Ravani, that's his name, right? You have
Yeah.
Ravani and you have Virginia, and then you have all the other orphans.
Hmm.
And you have them working together, and their friendship is super important. And there's some, in a sense, there's some magic going on, or at least in their minds, they have these skill sets or these magical ways of being that help them through life. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and so that was another way. So I wrote several different versions of this book that never got published because I was having a real hard time finding the tone, finding the voice, finding the way in. And the first one I wrote was just straight up realistic. So it's about a group of kids who have no parents, orphans, I guess, and they band together as a family, and they kind of are on the run from people who might want to catch them, and they take care of each other because no one is taking care of them. And our main character befriends them, learns their secret, and kind of ends up, befriending them and helping them. And there's danger pursuing them, yada yada yada. But my first contemporary, like realistic one, was way too dark and harrowing because, like, if you think of the reasons why a kid might be alone and on the run, like it's nothing fun about that. It's terrible, haunting, harrowing, unpleasant, traumatic stuff. And I had all that kind of in there just to make the story work. What are these kids running from? Why are, and then it was like not fun. And there was no way to have a satisfying ending. And it was just, and I knew it like this is not, this is not a story for kids. And so then I was looking for, but I loved the idea of the story, the seed of the story, the basic premise, but how can I make this premise work in a way that's not, actually traumatizing and horrible and dark? And so I tried to make it way more whimsical, way more fun, way less realistic. And so in some ways you turn things down, like depictions of abuse or neglect. I turned that all the way down, basically. But some things, ironically, if you turn up, it makes it less disturbing. Like if something's scary and it's like a 9 and you think this is too scary, you can turn it down to 7. Or if you turn it up to 12, it actually gets less scary because it gets kind of silly, kind of like Roald Dahl, like a Matilda. What's the teacher's name? Is Trunchbull or whatever. She's ridiculously bad. And that makes her less scary because it's so unrealistic. And so that's why Slaughterville and the Slaughterhouse, and the bad guy who's chasing the kids was no longer this, abusive parent. It's this hunter who hunts children, and he's over the top kind of evil, right? And so that makes it, ironically, less scary, less disturbing, more fun. And so the magic, that is unclear on the page, is this real magic. So the group of kids have these magical abilities, they think. And it's really open for interpretation. Do they actually have them? Is it just something that they wish they had, or maybe it's kind of what they have to believe so they don't feel so scared for being alone because they can't fly, they can't turn invisible. It's magical abilities that might just be they're good at something. Like one can throw things with incredible accuracy, right? Is that a magical skill, or is this kid just really good at throwing things, right? And so every one of their magical abilities is like that, so that it could be open for interpretation. But each one of their magic abilities really helps them during the course of the story, even though they're all these random kind of like throwing things really well. That all comes together at certain key points to help save them. And so that the magical bits was a way of making it as unrealistic as I could without having wizards and stuff, just to make it less dark, less disturbing, and more fun, more like a modern day fairy tale and less like a harrowing story of abuse and neglect.
Exactly. How's that? Yeah, I found it was I thought it was really interesting. And I thought that the magic really helped to make this story more interesting and fun to read. So I
Right.
agree with you.
Great.
I agree with you. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the remarkable journey of Coyote Sunrise? Now,
Sure.
I used to travel by motorhome as a kid,
Oh, nice.
and we used to even name our motorhomes. We had the Green Dragon, we had the Chocolate House. So
Right.
they had Jaeger. That was their bus that they rode in.
That's right.
And you captured the gas stations and the rest areas perfectly. I was brought back to my childhood and the Slurpee machines, the hot dogs, the chips, the sort of community and at same point isolation of a gas station.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about why this trip was so important to you and how you depicted the gas stations?
Sure. So I got the idea for the story of this girl who's grieving. 5 years ago, her mom and her sisters were killed in a car accident. Her and her dad are pretty messed up. And so they live on this bus, they travel around. And then there's a remarkable journey they have to go on to save something that means the world to her. And I got the basic premise for that, and got really excited about it. I thought, man, I think this could be a really fun story. And I don't think it would be A sad story, because if you think about the book, nothing sad happens in the book. All the sadness happened 5 years ago. This is really just like a road trip adventure story. And so even though it was a really sad premise, the story itself, I thought, would mostly be a fun adventure, and I hope that's the case. And so then I had this idea, and I wanted to get it as right as I could. So the summer before I wrote it, me and my two best friends, we go back all the way to childhood. We did this big road trip. We rented an RV, and we did like 10 days, and I forget how many thousands of miles. I mean, we started in San Diego, went all the way up to North Dakota, all the way as far as Arkansas, back through Texas in 10 days, just driving wherever we felt like it. We had no map, no agenda, to see, because like going on a trip is different than living on the road, and I wanted to live on the road. And so like gas stations, that's everything. When you're on that's your bathroom, that's your kitchen, that's if you go to truck stops, that's where you can take showers and stuff. And so, which we did, and not near as bad as it might sound. And so I got a feel for life on the road, and tried to make that come across. And even like the way that she talks. And so I got some questions from my editor at the beginning, like, what is Coyote's accent supposed to be? It's kind of country, but it's not exactly Southern, but it's like kind of hard. It feels distinctive and distinct and specific, but I can't put my finger on it. And I said, that to me, I was something I kind of made up. I call it the truck stop accent. Like if you go to truck stops all across this great nation, not everybody talks the same, but there is a kind of way that folks talk that's kind of earthy, kind of folksy. It is kind of ruralish, but also kind of urbanish. And it's just like the life on the road accent, I guess. And so that came through in the way that she talks as well. It's certainly blue collar. It's not a fancy way of talking at all. And so, yeah, I tried to get those details of life on the road as good as I could. And the first scene is a gas station scene. It seemed realistic. That's Coyote's life. If she's been living on the road for 5 years, she spent a lot of time in gas stations and truck stops and stuff, because that's where you stop. That's where you live, basically. It's not where you sleep, but it's kind of where you do everything else. And so I tried to make that a part of the story. So I'm glad it worked for you.
And there's also, well, the cat Ivan is critical to add some lightness to the story.
Yes. And I didn't plan on it being a cat story. Actually, that first chapter, she's at a gas station, she meets these kids, and there's a thing with a Slurpee, and then she gets this kitten. I didn't think that was going to be in the book. That was me. That's the first thing I wrote. I was just trying to get to know this character. I thought, okay, I've got this idea for this girl and her dad on the bus and the road. So I'm going to write a scene just to get a feel for her voice, what her life is like. And so again, probably at a gas station. That makes sense. And I didn't have any plan for the scene. I have her, walking in, and the person says something. The clerk says something about the fact she's not wearing shoes. So I'm just trying to get a feel for who is she? Is she uptight? Is she anxious? Is she carefree? And then why not a Slurpee machine? So that whole scene was just kind of spontaneous, unplanned. What if she gets a cat? Sure, why not? And then I finished the scene where she sneaks the cat on board because her dad has said no pets. And I thought, oh, you know what? I think I just started the book. I think that's the first chapter, because we actually learn a lot about her and her life, and kind of about her dad, and certainly about their relationship. It's loving, but it's also dysfunctional in a lot of ways. And so I thought, wow, I think that's chapter one. I was going to just throw it away. And there you go. So, and that's how Ivan got in the story. Now, again, I love animals. I love pets. I love pet stories. Ivan does lift the story up. So it works out. It all worked out as it should have. But I wasn't like, okay, I wrote a dog book. Now I'm going to write a cat book. Ivan was just one of those kind of happy accidents that happen when you're making up stories.
And boy, was Ivan cute.
Oh, good. Well, Ivan is back in the next one. So if you liked Ivan, there's more coming.
That's good. That's good. I wouldn't want Ivan to go away.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just lost a dog. And it's really helpful for those of us who have lost multiple dogs and cats to think about a doggy and kitty heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And it was real. I mean, I was reading as I was losing my dog. I was reading, although it was kind of sudden, but as I was like right after I lost my dog, I was reading Good Dog. Mm-hmm. And there's this beautiful doggy heaven. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's where she is.
Nice.
She's up there in doggy heaven, and she's looking down on me, and I'm going to go visit her someday.
Nice.
And I think that was a real important gift to those of us who have animals. And I wanted you to spend some time talking about that.
Sure, yeah. So, Good Dog was my fourth book, and it's about a dead dog, but he's already dead when the story starts, which does make it less sad. It's not an old yeller where the dog dies at the end and it ruins your weekend. But it starts out he's recently deceased, I guess. He doesn't remember how he died, but he's in this dog heaven. But then he does realize that when he died, that his boy was in danger and he's not okay with that. And so he figures out how he can come back like as a ghost to try to save his kid. And so it's another emotional adventurous journey story. This dog journeys back to Earth to save his kid. That's kind of all that I write. And it does have a optimistic view of the afterlife, I guess. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's kind of aligned with what I think and believe, and certainly what I hope. But also like for kids, like it's really, really comforting. Death is a scary idea, and it's a sad idea. If someone you love passes away, or a pet, a lot of kids, how they learn about death is with a pet. That's kind of the first death a lot of kids experience. And maybe when they're adults, they'll have some more cynical, jaded worldview, and that's perfectly okay. But if there's a kid who's really sad, like I want to give them comfort, not more sadness. Plus, it just makes the story work. Also, that's on a basic fundamental level. There kind of needed to be a dog heaven, otherwise there's no story. And so yeah, and I tried to make it, secular kind of like there's no I didn't want to offend anybody or bump anybody out. And so if you have a religious or a spiritual worldview, what I put in there, which is not a lot, that's 98% of the story happens here on Earth, but the glimpses you do see, it's not going to contradict anything that anyone believes, I don't think. As long as you believe in any sort of afterlife at all, it even leaves it open, like there's also more other different things kind of that are kind of implied, besides this one glimpse we have of it. And so, yeah, I think it's comforting. It's a happy thought. And for anyone of any age who loses a loved one or loses a pet, I've lost many pets over the years. It is great to think about the happier place that surely they must be. And like if there's any listeners out there who have kids who are dealing with this, with the loss of a pet, there are two great picture books I always recommend to people, both by Cynthia Rylant. One's called Dog Heaven and one's called Cat Heaven. And they're just beautifully little, simple, comforting depictions of dog heaven and cat heaven. And they are for a young, well, reader of any age, but especially a young reader who's like lost a cat or a dog. They are incredibly sweet and incredibly comforting. So I highly recommend those two picture books for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely comforting. And I think it's real hard for anyone to lose a pet, but it's really hard for a kid to lose a pet.
It is. It really is.
That's why you should get horses or birds, because they last forever.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have a little backyard, so I don't think a horse would work.
That'd be tough.
So in those books, also the soul is really important, really highlighted.
So definitely Good Dog. There's a lot of talks of souls, just because, I mean, that's what Brody's the main dog. That's what he is, right? Or you can call him a ghost once he's back on Earth, but he's not a physical dog when we meet him. He is. So I had to come up with something. Well, I did not invent souls. I had to have some way to describe him, and what's at stake. So there is a danger, and I had to invent a way that the world works. If he just comes back as a ghost, if nothing bad can happen to him, then it's really hard to have any stakes or suspense or danger in the story. And so there's a way, I won't get into it all, but a way that if a soul chooses to come back, which is a big if, and it's a big risk, and you shouldn't do it, and there's all these reasons, but if things go badly, you can in essence lose your soul, and be kind of trapped in a less than ideal existence. And there is some depiction of that, which also could be a little dark. And so that was just to add stakes, that your soul is, you can lose your soul if you play your cards wrong, so to speak. And so souls just worked for that. And also that we aren't just our bodies, right? Like, there is whatever your worldview is about religion or whatever, even if you just think we're your brains and your thoughts and your feelings, that's great. But if like I lost my arms tomorrow, that wouldn't change my soul or my personality, who I am as a person, right? And so that again aligned with what I think. And then in Midnight Children, my most recent book, I have to remember if the new one's come out. It has not come out yet. My most recent book, Midnight Children, it's not about that. It's not about death or the afterlife or anything like that. But the language of souls is used a lot. Just really kind of as a just a literary device or a language pattern where the narrator kind of talks about that. Like when two souls are lonely, they'll reach out towards each other. Not religious, just saying like, because otherwise it sounds too specific. When two children reach out, when two human beings are lonely, like it sounded too mechanical to me. And so the souls was just a way to make it feel more profound and more universal, and more meaningful. So there, I also had no religious agenda there. It was just it's felt to me like how the narrator would sound, and it made it feel to me more like kind of the classic storytelling vibe that I was going for.
Yeah, it worked. I mean, it definitely worked. I was like, okay, that makes sense. That
Good.
definitely makes sense. And it didn't feel religious to me either, because I'm not particularly religious. And I bought into it. I was like, oh yeah, I definitely can see my dog coming back to save me if he needed to.
Nice.
And he would risk his soul.
Right. Totally.
So that leaves us with Scar Island.
Yeah.
It's an interesting book about children and their relationship with adults, and then the relationship between sort of the child who's the bully and the child who's protecting another child, and then the child who's the leader, and then another adult who's sort of um, the librarian who plays a role in bringing books to the lives of the kids. So you want to talk a little bit about Scar Island?
Sure. Yeah, that is probably my darkest book in some respects. It's also my outlier. I think if there is one book of mine that doesn't quite fit with the others, that's it. It's not a journey story. I mean, it doesn't happen in the kid's town. The kid is off somewhere, but it all happens in one place. It's about a kid who gets sent to this like island prison reform school for kids. And it's a terrible place. It's kind of like Midnight Children that I over exaggerated to make it less scary. And so, I mean, it's awful. It's like comically awful. And the grown-ups are comically terrible. And then catastrophe strikes, and the kids, the inmates, the students, whatever, find themselves alone on the island. No more grown-ups. And so they have to survive the island and survive each other. And so it's like an adventure survival friendship story, but not technically a journey, or maybe it is a journey, but it's without movement because the whole thing happens on this island. And so, yeah, I basically for that one, I just got the idea for it. Like, what if, and that's how what most stories are. What if a kid with cancer ran away to climb a mountain? What if these kids on this island prison got stuck there? And what if they decided? So they actually have a chance when the catastrophe strikes, they have a chance to leave. But they decide to keep it a secret that they're still out there alone, and rule themselves. These are kids who are not fitting in. These are kids who are in trouble. These are kids who aren't that excited to go back home or are dreading going back home. And so they decide to stay there. Then, of course, things go terribly wrong. And then there's power dynamics, and there's bullies, and there's also a lot of hopefully uplifting. And there's a lot about friendship and belonging and connection. It's not just a dark story about things going wrong. It's also hopefully an uplifting story about things going right and kids figuring out who they want to be and who they don't want to be. And at the end, I think it's entirely hopeful. And so, yeah, it's definitely an outlier. But it also, I mean, it is a journey, and it's an emotional journey where a kid figures real truths out about themselves and their lives and figures out who they want to be and where they belong, which is kind of what all my books are about, just with very different setting and characters.
We forgot Some Kind of Courage.
Oh, yeah.
So I also wanted to talk to you about why you choose each animal is different. You choose a whole variety of animals. I mean, you have rats, you have horses, you have cats, you have dogs, you have all kinds of animals. And what makes you choose like one particular animal for each story?
Yeah. Well, there's also a goat in Coyote Sunrise. There's a goat who plays a small role in the story.
And a
Really,
cow. And a cow.
that's right. That's right. It's really just about what fits, right? Like I don't say, okay, this time I'm going to write a cow story. But you get the idea for the story, and then, like, honest truth, like I don't think a kid runs away to climb Mount Rainier. You couldn't do that with a cat, I don't think. So it kind of had to be a dog. Coyote, it could have been a puppy, I guess, but I think a cat really fit for their life, living in a bus. Some Kind of Courage is like a historical fiction set like in the pioneer homesteading days. And so horses were everywhere. Horses were important, and the horse plays a really important part in that story. And horses are great for that story because they are something that had a lot of value. Basically, this kid's an orphan, and his horse gets stolen, and he has to go on this adventure, this emotional journey to try to find her and get her back. But like you wouldn't back then steal a cat or probably a dog, right? But horses were like the cars, right? And so horses had a lot of value. So absolutely someone would steal the horse. But also, it's not just a bag of gold or something. It's something that we as humans and the main character, Joseph, that he connects with on a human level. He loves that horse. It's the last piece of his family he has left. So yes, it has incredible value. So it makes the plot work, but it also brings that emotion in. And so horses work for that one. And a town with a slaughterhouse. Cows work pretty well for that story. Hopefully, he's not freeing a cat from the slaughterhouse. Yikes! And so, yeah, it's just kind of what comes out of the story itself. And Scar Island, it's rats. The rats don't play an emotional part of the story, although kind of for one character. But it's realistic. These kids are on this island, this mostly made out of stone, and it's an old prison that's now this reform school. And so there's not going to be whatever deer walking around. It's going to be rats. It's both adds flavor, adds creepy tension to this creepy setting, but it's also realistic. There would have been rats there for sure, and there would have only been rats there. There it could have been seagulls, I guess, but other than that, it was going to be rats. And so I do look for where the animals can fit, but you don't have to look that hard, especially if you're an animal lover like me, and you just gotta put the animals in a story in a way that makes sense, but also hopefully adds to the story for the reader.
Interesting. You have cliffhangers at the end of every chapter of every one of your books. You
Yes.
sit down to read your book and you just can't put them down.
Oh, good. So I think that would be a fair critique of my writing for sure, is that I probably overuse the cliffhangers. But for me, it came out of my 13 years as a librarian. My job was to get kids excited about books and excited about reading. And most of my students were reluctant readers because most of my students, English was their second language. I worked in a really high poverty school, amazing school. The kids were incredible. The teachers were amazing. But getting a lot of the kids excited about books and reading was hard. And so I spent 13 years like kind of training for this job as an author because I was seeing what kids liked, what they didn't like, what hooked them, what didn't hook them, what grabbed them, what they wanted, what they reached for, what they wanted more of, what they put back away because it wasn't hooking them. And I definitely learned, at least with my awesome students, is you can't waste a reader's time. If kids are busy, and a lot of kids don't think they like reading, and so you can't give a book to a kid and say, hey, keep reading. It gets really good in 80 pages. That kid is not going to give that book 80 pages. They're probably not going to give it 8 pages. You've got to try to hook them, certainly in the first chapter, hopefully in the first page, or maybe the first paragraph. I even try to have really good first paragraphs where there's a hook and they're wondering about something, because that's just kind of how I train myself, is working with these awesome kids and trying to make them like books. And so, but then that carries throughout the whole narrative. So yes, I always I don't know if it's every single chapter, but it's close. Have a cliffhanger. And I do that on purpose. So I never want to write a chapter that has a rising action, then resolution, and it finishes with a nice, tidy ending to the chapter. So the reader say, oh, that was a good chapter. And they put the book down. I want them to say, oh my gosh, I've got to at least read the first page of the next chapter to see how is this kid going to be okay? What happens next? How does this resolve? And so I break it up that way on purpose. I don't have here's a scene, here's a chapter, here's a scene, here's a chapter. I have my chapter breaks basically in the middle of my scenes. And so I just kind of skew it all like one little notch to the side. And so that the chapter break happens right before the climax of each scene. And it's an easy trick, and it's maybe a cheap trick. But again, my goal is to keep kids reading. And so even if it's cheesy, to always have a dun, dun, dun. And hopefully it's not too heavy-handed, but yeah, I want to keep kids reading. And so you want to have that suspense and that excitement and that wondering.
Well, it kept me reading, so it worked.
Oh, good.
And I don't think it's necessarily cheating. I think it works.
Good.
So, what would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Oh, I don't know. Like I feel incredibly fortunate and lucky to be where I am. I don't think like I wouldn't want to risk anything changing. I wouldn't say, oh, you know what? You have the chance to be a writer someday. So put all your other dreams and stuff to the side and work on writing, and you can be published by the time you're 18 or whatever. Because then who knows? Like this whole little journey of life has turned out really well for me, and I pinch myself every day. And so I don't think I would say anything to my 10-year-old self, because what if that 10-year-old self made different choices and then I didn't end up where I ended up? But I mean, on just a basic level, like especially through your teen years, you worry about so much and you're self-conscious about so much and you're insecure about so much and you're like just be happy with who you are. And if someone is mean to you, it doesn't get you, fine, they don't get you, find the people that do get you. Like just those life lessons, like you got one shot at life as far as we know. So enjoy it, be a good person to the people around you and hang out with the people who are good to you. And don't stress all the stuff like we all had terrible days in middle school, right, where someone said something or whatever, but in the long scope of our life, are those days as important and as life or death as they seemed at the time? No. So the more you can shake things off and be happy with yourself, the better. So I guess I would say that to my little 10-year-old self.
All right. What about for budding authors?
Oh, for budding authors, I always have kind of the same piece of advice I give. One is to, of any age, is to write as much as you can. Of course, writing is the best practice for writing. It doesn't matter what you write. It can be school newspaper, poetry, diary, fan fiction. It's all the same skill. It's having a thought or an idea in your head and trying to put it into words that are clear and interesting. Doesn't matter who you're writing for or what it is, it's the exact same skill. So write. Write as much as you can because it'll make you better. Two is to read a lot. Reading is the second best thing you can do to practice for writing because you get exposed to words and sentences and imagery and metaphors and characters and plots. You get a feel for the kinds of stories you like and the kinds of stories you don't like. And you can think about the books you're reading from a writer perspective and say, oh, like how did the author make me feel this big feeling? Or how did the author hook me so good? Or the opposite. Oh, I lost interest. What did the author do that bumped me out of the story? What would I have done differently if I was writing this story? So reading can really help your writing. And the third thing is to have fun with your writing and to not worry about making it good, because I find that paralyzing. Is this any good? Is this the way the story should go? Is this the best choice? And I'll just sit there staring at my screen, writing nothing. And so relax, just write. And some stuff you'll like, some stuff you won't. Some stuff you'll keep, some stuff you'll throw away. That is not mistakes. That's not lost ground. That's what writing is. The stuff that you decide is worth keeping, even if it's terrible, then you roll up your sleeves. And when you worry about it being good is when you're revising and rewriting and editing. When you're just making up your stories, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It's probably going to be terrible. Every one of my rough drafts is almost pure garbage. But then I roll up my sleeves and I dive back in and I work really hard to try to make that garbage less garbagey all the time until it's hopefully something good. So have fun with your writing and don't worry about it being good. Those are my 3 pieces of advice.
Got it. What's on your professional and your personal bucket list?
Oh, personal bucket list. I would like to hike to Machu Picchu. That's always been one of my bucket list things. And so that would be really cool. I like travel and I like kind of outdoorsy stuff and I like hiking and stuff. So that kind of would tick a lot of boxes. And I love history. I was a history major. And so that ticks a lot of my boxes to be able to hike up through the rainforest in the Andes to Machu Picchu. Top of my list. Maybe someday, hopefully. Hopefully before my knees get too much older. They're more creaky every day. Probably better get it on the books. Professional bucket list, I don't know. I want to keep telling stories and keep having fun doing it. I would like to tell different kinds of stories. I would like to maybe, I've got some picture books that are coming out in the next couple of years. I've got one coming out this year and then a couple more coming out in subsequent years that are already under contract. So that's fun. I love picture books. Maybe write a YA book someday. Maybe write an adult book, although I don't feel super drawn to that. I love writing books for younger readers. Maybe write a graphic novel. I love graphic novels. I've got an idea for one. It'd be fun to write that and see if I can make that happen. So just kind of stay active, stay playful, stay creative, have fun, and kind of squeeze this fruit for as long as I can. Because again, it was a dream come true and a long time coming. And so I want to not always think about the future, but kind of enjoy what I've got right now.
Anything we missed?
I don't think so. That was great. We covered a lot.
We did cover a lot, didn't we? So this was awesome. Oh, why don't you let us know where people can reach you?
Oh, okay. So probably I am on Twitter. I guess it's called X, right? But everyone still calls it Twitter. So I am out there at Dan Gemeinhart. I'm on Instagram at Dan Gemeinhart. I technically have Facebook, but honestly, I go out once a year and I'll see like all these messages from people and feel like a terrible person, and then I'll log back out. So don't reach out to me on Facebook, despite the fact that I exist there. And I just don't care for Facebook. And my website is just dangemeinhart.com. It's that easy. It's got some information about me and my books and stuff, but it's also got like send Dan a note. And you can click the button and it'll send me an email. And so those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Nice. Thank you. I had a great time chatting with you.
Great.
do do do